I think that's good. Do you need stapler? Anyone need stapler? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. A couple of minutes more, and then we go.
Okay, shall we? Okay, first things first. You all saw me put a text through the group chat. So if you're wondering what that is, I wanted to put a class this week. I couldn't squeeze the time out. So I'm putting an extra class on Monday to do market structure. It's optional. If you want to come, please feel free. I'm definitely having it. There are at least 2 people coming already. The plan is to go through some content, look through a couple of essay questions, probably 2 or 3 of them, and to field questions. So what I told everyone is, if you're planning to come, what would be a good idea is go and prep beforehand and then WhatsApp me or email me questions. Then I can actually focus the class on answering questions that you all might have. So it's going to be quite fluid, but the main idea is to talk about market structures. I'm probably going to put one more on Wednesday, and that one will be BOP exchange rates. And then I'll probably put one more the following Monday. So that's kind of the plan. And last thing to remember is next week, right, there's no class for this time slot now. I'm not seeing you all until the 17th. Right, so give you all time to study for GP and the other subjects. Can? So the plan is there's going to be these 3 extra classes, and then 16, 17. Hi. And then we're going to do 3 intensive classes on the 19th, 20th, and 21st. Yeah, we're going to do 3 intensive classes on the 19th, 20th, and 21st in the days that sandwiches and leads up to your paper 1 and paper 2. So I will give you all the timings for that again, but it's going to be 3-hour sessions. Okay? So I'll let you know again. But if you're coming for Monday, can you just add your name into the list for me, just so I can get a sense of how many people come. Don't later 3 people RSVP, then 20 people come, right? Then I need to make sure that there's more table space. Can? Okay, so last week we looked at 2017's micro questions, so the first 3 questions. We saw that they were very hard, right? Fortunately, macro is going to be a savior if you did the paper last year. I think last year was weird again, right? Normally, I told you my students like to do micro, they do more micro, but last year, most people did do macro, and then it made a lot more sense. Just a quick note, if you've looked at the questions already, I'm not sure what you think of them, but actually the hardest question is question 5. Question 5 is the question that you avoid. We'll talk more about why later on. 4 and 6 are considered easy. Easy, why? Standard structure, right? Very standard kind of scope of the essay. You just got to be careful to do your point selection in context. Okay? But I would consider last year's macro question as really, really easy. There isn't really a trade question, so that's pretty good as well. Okay, let's go straight to question 4, shall we? That's page 3. We're going to analyze question 4 first. So question 4 is the unemployment question. It's very straightforward. They ask you to discuss the various causes of unemployment and economic policies that will help to achieve full employment in today's globalized world. Now, the first thing, of course, is to not get confused by this. Full employment doesn't really mean YF, right? Because as we know, even if you're at YF, there's still structural and frictional unemployment. So when we use the term full employment, we really mean we want to reduce unemployment to 0 across the board, across all types. And that's what we really mean. I mean, in practice, no one is able to get 0 unemployment, but countries are generally trying to strive towards that. So that's a small thing to pay attention to, but I think by now you shouldn't be confused by that already. In terms of structure, right, it's not hard. 3 causes of unemployment. Cyclical, structural, and frictional. Okay? You already know that you have to do that. I know some of you have 4 types, right? You've got seasonal unemployment as well. But even if you do learn seasonal, I wouldn't replace any one of these with seasonal. These 3 are infinitely more important. But out of the 3, the least important one is really frictional, because it's the shortest, but even then, it's a more important source of unemployment as compared to seasonal unemployment. And then of course, you need 3 policies, and you need pros and cons. Okay, to be more specific, it's back to my 2.5 policy rule, right? You don't really have time to do like 3 full policies. So typically I say, give me balance, give me 1 of each, do them in full, and then your last policy, just kind of keep it a bit shorter. So the split here is quite obvious, right? The split here between the three unemployment types is you need something for cyclical, and then you need something for this, right? So it's kind of 1 and 2. And then your third option is usually a substitute for the cyclical one, right? That's the way to think about it in terms of policy. Now, what makes this question complex slightly is the addition of the phrase, I believe is globalized world. So this is where if you give a textbook essay on unemployment and policies, you will likely not cross a C, because you need to select your points and link your arguments in the context of a globalized world. Okay, so they didn't test you globalization in any of these three essays. This is not a globalization question, but you need to borrow ideas that you have from globalization to help you explain the causes of unemployment, as well as why the policies work and what limitations you might face. So you need to integrate that. And when we say contextualize, we really mean no more than 3 or 4 sentences within each paragraph, just kind of linking to the question. Okay, that's the only thing to look out for. It's not really hard. Now, one interesting choice I made for this essay was that instead of using exchange rate policy, now, first things first, right? It's not, they didn't constrain you to Singapore, so you don't have to just focus on Singapore, which means that any policy goes. But because it's unemployment, okay, the top pick for policy for unemployment has to be FP, because FP is the most direct. If the government spends, you will create jobs, full stop. That's a fact. So that's always our top pick for cyclical. And you know that you need SSP, right, for your structural and frictional. So the question remains, right, what's the last policy you go with? Can you go with monetary policy for interest rate? With interest rates, you can, absolutely. Can you do exchange rates? You can. But for this essay, I made a choice to talk about trade policies instead, because it's globalized world. So I dropped monetary policy and exchange rate policy in favor of trade policy. And if you want to think about the thought process behind that, it's very simple. First and foremost, exchange rate policy is a terrible way to tackle employment. Generally, no one really does that in real life, right? Why? Central bank's priority is generally to maintain the rate of inflation, right, at the level that they want. So they don't really use it as an unemployment tool. Monetary policy, can it work? Can it works great, right? If it's done right, we did it after the financial crisis. US kept interest rates low for 10 years, and they are at an all-time low for unemployment rate. So does it work? Absolutely does. But the thing is, it's very similar in terms of how it works to fiscal policy, and yet it's not so direct, right? So I find it too duplicative to do both fiscal and monetary. So I made the choice I did. Having said that, you don't get marked down even if you use exchange rates, even if you use interest rate policy. But my policy choice, my point selection, whether it's micro or macro, is often heavily influenced by the ease of contextualization. That means how easy it is for me to bring in real life examples to justify my answers. So the harder it is to do that, the less inclined I am to use that policy. Make sense? That's a very useful way of thinking about what policies and what points to bring in, right? Okay, let's jump right in. I overran this question by a lot yesterday. I took 45 minutes to talk about this question, so I need to speed up a bit today. Okay, first paragraph. Full employment refers to a scenario where there's no unemployment in a country, where all individuals of working age who are actively seeking jobs are able to get employment. There are 3 types of unemployment that can exist in an economy: cyclical, structural, frictional. Full employment will be when none of these types of unemployment exists in the economy. This line is a bit redundant, right? If you want to save time, don't really need that. A globalized world is characterized by a high level of economic interdependence as a result of FTAs that allow countries to trade goods and services without tariffs or other protectionist measures, free labor flows where workers can seek employment abroad, and free capital flows where financial capital can flow between countries chasing investment returns from interest rate differentials. What kind of investments chase interest rate differentials? Hot money, right? I'm talking about hot money. Stocks and bond markets, or through capital investments in the form of FDI. So very standard introduction. Again, we're just taking whatever is in the preamble and just kind of explaining and defining them. Okay? If you don't like to define so many things here, it's totally fine. Just push it into the body. You can talk about it later on. Cyclical unemployment arises when the economy is in a contractionary cycle, where aggregate demand is weak, resulting in a level of national income that is below the full employment level of output, below the maximum productive capacity of the economy. The big AD for final goods and services translate into a lower derived demand. That's the key phrase. Okay, derived demand for all factors of production, which includes labor. This then results in cyclical unemployment as illustrated in figure 1 below. Okay. So fairly straightforward. I mean, this part is really, really textbook, right? YF denotes the full employment level of output, the maximum amount of goods and services that can be produced in the economy in a given time. When AD is weak, perhaps due to negative economic growth in the economies of trading partners, resulting in lower net exports. Why is this important? Two reasons. One, a lot of people do not have the habit of explaining causes when they're trying to show macroeconomic scenarios. You need to. So whenever you do a factors of goals question, remember, the depth comes from going in and talking about what might have caused such a scenario. So whether it's growth is inflation, is unemployment, is BOP, you don't score well when you say, oh, BOP could, deficit could arise when net exports are weak. Then your marker will put a comment, why? Right? Why might this happen? Right? So you need to account for that. So that's the first reason why this sentence is important. There's a second reason here. There's a very strategic and tactical choice that I made to bring in this point. Why? Why did I choose to talk about this as a cyclical unemployment factor?
You touched on the globalization.
Because the context is globalized world, right? And that helps me later on if I talk about policies. My policies can come back and relate to this point I talked about. And then your comment will be, it's nuts, right? Like, where got time to go and think so far in exam? So you do it in practice. You train yourself to see the links so that in exam it will come more naturally. And then you can pick more strategically. So bottom of page 3, right, last 3 lines, the amount of economic output produced will be lower than the full employment level of output at Y0. Because X minus M is a component of AD, which comprises CGI X minus M, a lower X minus M necessarily translates into a lower level of AD. At Y0, there will be less demand for labor, resulting in cyclical unemployment. In a globalized world, this is contextualization, being explicit, right? Countries are dependent on trading partners to sell goods and services to in the form of exports. When trading partners experience negative economic growth, their national income will fall, results in lower consumption of all goods and services, including imports. This will then translate into lower export revenue for the exporting country and a lower X minus M and AD. Right, so that explains the factor that I stated earlier on. Because I haven't explained it. I haven't explained the link between why weak negative economic growth in trading partners will lead to lower AD and lower X minus M in the country. So that's the reason why. Structural unemployment arises when workers do not have the necessary skills required to obtain employment. This could be the result of demand and supply factors in the labor market. So, as usual, right, I always teach you want to unpack the point. So there are both demand and supply factors that drives structural unemployment. So I list there's supply, there's demand factor as well. Right? Of course, that's how my notes are structured. If you don't have the organization, it's fine, but it's good to have. Okay, demand and supply factor. And what you will find that I did later on in the paragraph is I gave one demand, one supply factor to explain why structural unemployment could arise. Do you need that? No. Do you need both? That's what I meant. Do you need both? No. If you have no time, just slice one out. Just talk about either one. Okay? For instance, a structural decline in certain industries. When we say structural decline, you can just translate it as permanent decrease in demand. That's a good way to think about structural decline. Okay? Structural decline in certain industries due to a loss of comparative advantage will lead to a permanent fall in demand for labor in those industries. In the US, their car making industry has suffered since Japanese car makers came into the market and were able to produce better cars more cheaply. You don't need to go into comparative advantage, so that just takes up too much time. That's a distraction. This resulted in a structural decline in the US car making industries, putting thousands of workers out of jobs as their skills in this industry were now obsolete. The lack of transferability of their skills points to occupational immobility. This is important. That's the little bit of depth, right? And keywords that we can actually use over here. But this is what we find. This is very, I think this paragraph so far is very symptomatic of macro generally, which is that we generally like keywords and phrases. So the explanation is very like example heavy. So number one is you need good examples. Number two, you need to integrate your examples with keywords as much as possible. Okay, occupational immobility. Then moving on the supply side, workers could find themselves structurally unemployed due to technological advancements that led to greater automation in many industries, right? So automation, technological advancements make it cheaper to use machinery than to use workers. For example, Amazon, the largest e-commerce company in the world, has automated warehouses that handle the logistics and fulfillment of customer orders. This has displaced thousands of workers who worked in the logistics industry, as automation is often a cheaper and more cost-efficient option for businesses. So this part is important. Right? This part is the context, the linking back to theory. Globalization has accelerated these demand and supply factors. Why is this line important? Because if we just look at what we have said so far, it's not obvious, right? So what has globalization got to do with all this? Right? So globalization has accelerated these factors. Okay? So you can kind of think of it as when the world wasn't so globalized, even if there's a technological advancement somewhere else in the world, that wouldn't really affect you. So you think about Singapore, actually, you're not creative technologies, right? So creative actually was one of the pioneers of the MP3. Right? So they made one of the first MP3 players. But of course, when the iPod came in, they got slayed, they just died, right, overnight. So that only happens because we are so globalized, right? It's so easy to ship these things into Singapore. But if it weren't like that, then those factors doesn't affect you or doesn't affect you that quickly, right? So globalization accelerated these factors. Free trade with Japan has cost thousands of jobs in the US car making industry, while the free flow of capital and labor allows technological advances like the one adopted by Amazon to be replicated freely around the world, displacing thousands of workers with intelligent robots. So if you want to do the supply factor, the technology factor, you still need to link to globalization. So my point here is that labor flows and capital flows drive technological movement around the world. And that's also only possible in a globalized world. So in a very direct way, if Amazon invests in Singapore, then we will see that kind of displacement here. They bring the technology from US to Singapore through free capital flows as enabled by globalization, and then we'll see that kind of structural unemployment going on here. For the labor flows front, one way to think about it is, like for example, China. China has a lot of students that go to US every year for university. A lot of them attend very good schools. When they're done, they stay in Silicon Valley and they work. So what you find is that a lot of Chinese tech companies have Silicon Valley alumni. So they bring the technology and the know-how back into China, they start companies, and the same kind of structural unemployment and technological disruption can happen. Okay, that's why I talk about capital and labor flows. This is a very troublesome point to bring across, right? Like I said to you earlier, you just have demand or supply factor is enough. But for the purpose of the model essay, I'm just using it as a teaching opportunity. So I give you both. Lastly, frictional unemployment arises due to imperfect information that exists in labor markets. Workers do not know of all available job openings and their wages, and employers do not know the quality and suitability of all workers that are seeking jobs in the market. As such, workers and employers need time to find one another through the process of job applications, shortlisting, and interviews. This time that workers spend between jobs results in frictional unemployment. Okay, it's basically workers being in between jobs. The time you get out of one job and the time you take to find another one. Of course, in real life, people are not so dumb, unless you get fired or you get let go, right? Or you want to take a break, which is very common nowadays, right? Millennials work too much, need to travel, all that. So they quit their job, travel 1 month, look for a job. So that's where frictional unemployment comes from. But in real life, people generally look for a job to jump into before they leave. Okay, that's the smart thing to do, right? You don't want to go without income, right? But this is what frictional unemployment describes. Where workers are temporarily unemployed while looking for suitable employment. Globalization through the spread of technology and ideas has indirectly aided the alleviation of frictional unemployment as the internet has improved the transparency in the labor market And job sites, like what? Like LinkedIn, have helped numerous workers and employers find each other more easily. I think the question that comes to mind is, this sounds like a good thing, right? Yeah, you know what? The truth is, globalization is bad for cyclical, bad for structural, but it's not really very bad for frictional unemployment. I mean, honestly, apart from job sites, it doesn't really affect frictional unemployment anyway. But we still need to contextualize somehow to the context. Okay, nonetheless, while information about available jobs and job seekers has improved, there's still substantial imperfect information that exists as employers and workers do not know their respective compatibility. So you can find your next employer through LinkedIn, you can find your next employee through LinkedIn, but you still need to interview. Correct. Okay, to tackle unemployment brought about by globalization, governments have to adopt a mixture of demand-side policies, supply-side policies, and trade policies in order to achieve full employment. Okay, so this sentence, normally you see it put in the intro, but my intro was so long, so I just split it. I did my part A first, and then I put this here to bridge into part B. Firstly, the government could adopt expansionary FP to maintain a low rate of unemployment. I'm not going to read this, okay? This is very textbook, it's just copy and paste. So if you're still struggling till today, right, as to how to give your fiscal policy explanation rigor, this is as rigorous as you can be. The main thing to focus on is three things. Consumption, right? I need to see things about purchasing power, right? The willingness and ability to buy more goods and services. Investments, there are two things. Okay? I cut taxes, I got more profits now with which I can invest. That's number one. Number two, whatever I invest in will give me more returns in future because the taxes I pay on them goes down. So I need both. Okay? One is more money to invest, one is more attractive to invest. The fourth sentence on the bottom, you see this part about make investments and accumulate inventories. Just a quick reminder, I consists of three things. There are three things that qualifies as I. Capital goods, that one you know lah, right? When firms buy factories, they buy machinery, they buy man-made FOP, those are all capital, that's I. The second one is inventory. So if you're Apple and you're building iPhones and you buy lithium to make your batteries with, I think in real life they don't make their own batteries lah, but just as an example. Okay. So they buy lithium and then they start making batteries. This half-finished products also count as inventory. Okay, also counts as investments. Because the main idea behind investments is you're buying something that can allow you to earn money in future. Right? That's what investments are. The last category is what people always get wrong, is housing. If you buy a house, actually it comes under I, not under C, if you really want to split hairs. Because C is consumption of, well, consumer goods and services. Right? So I consists of housing because when you buy a house, technically that's an asset that can generate income. Okay? So housing goes under I. But it's not something they actively mark you down for. So don't worry too much, but it's good to know. Ken? Let's go on to page 5. Expansionary FP, do you really need this diagram? Not really. You can actually just merge it 2 in 1 with the earlier figure 1. Okay? As shown in figure 2, the rise in AD is represented by a rightward shift in the AD curve. Okay, this is a very textbook explanation of the ADAS process. So as AD rises up the intermediate range towards full employment level, increase in GPL, real national income, right? Due to the increasing scarcity of resources in the intermediate range. So remember, if you're explaining it rising up in the intermediate range, the key thing is about the scarcity of FOP, right? The key contrast here that we are making is this. Okay, just very quickly. You see, when AD rises in the flat range, in the horizontal range, in the Keynesian range, if AD rises by this much, your output goes up by that much. Just putting aside multiplier for a while, right? The reason is because in this range, right, when firms want to produce more, they can hire more workers, buy more factors of production at one constant price. So at this GPL, I'm willing to sell you more because my cost and my profit margins stay the same. So it's kind of like now, all of you in class, you all got no job, right? So if I want to, produce more in my factory, I want to hire you all will all be fighting to get a job, right? So I don't need to offer you higher wages to come and work for me. But if all of you are employed except one person, when I try to hire that person, he might have competing job offers. Then I need to start paying higher wages to attract him to come and work for me. Now, if I were going to pay higher wages, I will not do so unless I know I can sell at higher prices. That's the mechanics at play here. So when you got a Keynesian range, idle resources, a lot of unemployment means I can hire more, buy more FOP at constant prices. So because my cost stays constant on a per unit basis, I'm willing to sell more at the same general price level. But once you go into the curved range, I need people that want to buy my goods and services to beat up prices first. Then I'll be incentivized to produce more because it gets costlier to produce. Okay, that's the philosophy behind the Keynesian range and the intermediate range. Okay, so that's what I'm explaining here. Firms require higher GPL, blah blah blah. The key part, of course, comes back to the link to cyclical unemployment, which is where I say as firms increase output, production, there will be a derived demand for more labor, amongst other factors of production. Cyclical unemployment, defined as the unemployment associated with lack of demand for labor due to weak AD, will thus be alleviated. At YF, there will be no cyclical unemployment, so fiscal policy can reduce unemployment amidst falling net exports. You see the link back to our earlier point? However, there are limitations to fiscal policy. Firstly, the main consideration would be the extent that the country is dependent on X minus M as a source of economic growth. Then you'll be like, that's so strange, right? I always preach to you, fiscal policy, the most important limitations are crowding out, multiplier. Where is it? This is my first limitation because it's the most contextually relevant one. Right? So this is traditionally a nature of economy argument, correct or not? But we brought it here because we need to talk about this in the context of a globalized world. So in a globalized world, your cyclical unemployment risk comes from changing in your export component. So the effectiveness of fiscal policy depends on how dependent you are on exports. So I illustrated that with the case of Singapore. Right, in the case of Singapore, where X is 200% of GDP, it's difficult for the government to meaningfully increase G to mitigate the impact of a fall in X minus M. Even with tax cuts and the resultant rise in C&I would also unlikely be sufficient. This is best seen in 2009, right, the financial crisis. We had a 20.9 billion fiscal package, but we could not prevent our economy from contracting by 2%. Just to give you a context of how big 20.9 billion is, that's typically a quarter of the government's annual fiscal budget. So that's a lot. It's really a lot. That means they decide to spend 20 billion more that year to boost the economy. It's close to 10% of our GDP. Our GDP is like 300 billion. So 20 billion is like, well, maybe 7%. It's a lot, but we still contracted 2% because the whole world was in recession. Okay? In addition, there's likely to be a problem of time lag. Then you're like, isn't time lag like the third most important point? But again, contextually, this is a great point. As the approval of fiscal spending requires parliamentary approval. This is a long and bureaucratic process and starts from the government first identifying potential weakness in aggregate demand all the way until the funds are actually injected in the economy. The time taken for this process, which will run up to months, will limit the effectiveness of using FP to reduce the high rate of unemployment in a timely fashion, especially if the decline in X minus M is abrupt and unexpected, right? Which will be the case if you are very globalized. Furthermore, even if the policy were to work perfectly, it cannot reduce structural and frictional unemployment. So we go back to our usual bridging paragraph, right? Bridging point for us to introduce SSP. So once AD reaches YF, further increases in AD cannot reduce unemployment any further. So you need supply side policies. SSP includes interventionist and market-oriented measures and mainly target the improvement of the productive capacity of the economy, which increases the full employment level output. Interventionist SSP involves spending by the government intervening in the economy to bring about the desired changes. So interventionist involves spending, involves the government intervening directly, that's what I'm saying. Market-oriented, in contrast, is about policy making. Structural unemployment, defined as unemployment that's associated with a lack of suitable skills, can be alleviated through the use of such interventionist policies. Workers who are structurally unemployed find their skills obsolete in the face of changing economic structures. Thus, the government can spend money to set up training institutes, subsidizing education and reskilling programs in order to equip these workers with relevant skills that can allow them to find employment. In Singapore, this has taken the form of Workforce Singapore. Main focus is to tie up with various, this part is the example bit. If you're lacking time, compress your examples, don't be so long-winded. But when I give you the model essay, if I don't explain the example, you will never get it, right? So it's a bit longer in mine, but you can afford to cut it down in yours. Ensure workers are constantly able to retool and reskill to stay relevant as the economy transforms. The government is also offering subsidies in the form of Skills Future and Skills Future scholarships to encourage more workers to undergo retraining. Something unattainable through fiscal policy, yet highly effective in reducing structural unemployment. Okay, then the link comes. This is particularly crucial in a globalized world where the rate of industry transformation has accelerated. The disruption, the rate of structural unemployment happening has been faster and faster. And the risk of job losses from rapid and sudden declines in industries has increased substantially. Without a focus on retraining workers, okay, go on to the next page. Without a focus on retraining workers, the risk of structural unemployment ballooning is extremely high. The setup of Workforce Singapore and aggressive campaigning to pick up new skills to switch industries also helps to alleviate frictional unemployment. Workers get frictionally unemployed due to informational imperfection, where they're unable to find new jobs quickly due to a lack of awareness of these opportunities. Employers also lack the information to find suitable hires, so the setup allows them to find each other more easily, reducing search costs and frictional unemployment. Now, very quick note. My interventionist and market-oriented paragraphs are very long. They're way longer than what's expected from you because I touch on both structural and frictional in each one of them. You don't need to do that. You can just do interventionist for one and then market-oriented for the other. But again, for teaching purposes, I included both. Market-oriented policies, on the other hand, involve regulatory changes in the product and labor markets to reduce market frictions and encourage innovation and efficiency. For instance, reducing unemployment benefits and lowering personal income tax rates at the lower end could reduce frictional unemployment. This will encourage workers to more proactively seek out jobs, since lower unemployment benefits mean less ability to stay jobless for an extended period of time, and lower tax rates increases the marginal benefit of seeking employment more quickly. Now, this is what I always teach you, relating to the concept of a reservation wage. Right? You don't really need to know it, but you're allowed to use it. And the reason why I teach it is because it sits very nicely in what market-oriented policy is supposed to look like. If you just talk about job fairs, they will give it to you, but it doesn't fit nicely under market-oriented, neither does it fit nicely under interventionist. That's why I always teach you this, right? So reservation wage is the minimum wage you are willing to accept, right, when you're looking for a job. So the key thing to understand is that when we say people are taking time to find jobs, they are frictionally unemployed, what they really mean is the pay is not good enough. Right? It's not because you cannot find jobs. For starters, you want to work, go to McDonald's, confirm got space. Right? But the thing is, it might not pay well enough. So, how do we alter the reservation wage? The way to think about it is like that. If you're unemployed, right? If you're unemployed and the government pays you $1,000 a month, right? And you're unemployed, you pay $1,000 a month, and you go get a job that pays you $1,200. But taxes are 10%. What's your take home? $10.80. Will you go from staying at home every day to watch Netflix to go out and work 50 hours a week to earn $80 more? That makes absolutely no sense, right? But if I cut the unemployment benefit and I cut the taxes, I give you more reason to go out and look for a job. Correct? Okay? That's how this mechanic works. You can't get that, it's fine. Just talk about job fairs. That's still okay. Singapore has implemented a model of this through the workfare scheme, where lower income groups earn a supplementary income from the government when they take up employment while attending retraining courses on the side. This forces them to stay employed rather than spend an extended amount of time between jobs. In addition, implementing anti-competition regulations to maintain market competitiveness across various industries could also have an impact on structural unemployment. Firms pressured by competition might be compelled to send their workers for training and reskilling to ensure that they maintain their competitive advantage in the industry. They might also be more willing to take on workers who lack experience and teach them the necessary skills for the job, as greater competition in the market could mean lower availability of skilled labor. This could also reduce structural unemployment. Okay, so if you're wondering, because I never really talked about this before, but that's how market-oriented policies can help with structural unemployment. Because it's all about training. It's all about training, it's all about giving workers skills. So if companies are actually willing to take these people on and train them and teach them and improve them, then you don't have that big of an issue. Okay? However, the biggest limitation of SSP is the time lag. All these policies require time to take effect and can only alleviate unemployment over time. In addition, outcomes are indeterminate. This is quite standard, right? SSP is really always these few points. Indeterminate, no guarantee that training or education schemes could lead to greater employment, particularly if the government does not correctly anticipate the needs of the economy. The example I've given you is China. China, for 40 years, they have tried. Is it 40 years? Yeah, about 40 years. They have tried. They poured billions into chip making, not potato chip, silicon wafer chips. So because they haven't really done that well, they are still forced to buy chips from Korea, from Taiwan, from the US, because these three countries still have better technology. So my point is, just because you want to develop a new industry to put workers in, doesn't mean the industry will work. So you might not necessarily be able to reduce structural unemployment. Okay? But having said all that, right, supply side policy is still important. If you don't do, they've got no chance of reducing frictional and structural unemployment. It's just that they might not bear fruit so quickly. Lastly, the pursuit of greater globalization through future agreements that allow for the free flow of labor and capital is also important in the pursuit of full employment. Well, counterintuitive, right? Because you might think like, hey, globalization worsens the problem, right? But no, because if you are a country with comparative advantage and you can sell more exports, you will be able to create more employment over time. So signing FTAs allow countries to sell more exports to their trading partners through the removal of tariffs and other protectionist barriers. This can raise AD, reducing cyclical unemployment. It could also allow the development of new industries that the government could train workers for to reduce structural unemployment, right? For example, let's think about it like that. If you look at Singapore, right, let's say oil and gas. Years ago, we started building the oil and gas industry, and it hires a ton of people. If we didn't have free trade and globalization, we drew oil where? Bukit Timah? There's no oil here, right? So you need a globalized market, you need countries to sell to in order to develop some industries. So can it alleviate structural unemployment? It absolutely can. Giving you access to the global market allows you to create industries that sell into these markets that you might not be able to sell locally, and that's totally fine. Okay, capital inflows could also translate into FDI that could increase AD and reduce cyclical unemployment, as well as develop future industries that could create even more jobs for the future. Labor flows, this is an interesting application, could help to alleviate geographical immobility, which in turn reduce structural unemployment for economies that are facing declining industries. You think about it, right? If, let's say, for example, US car making industry decline, General Motors move their factory to Mexico. In principle, right, the structurally unemployed Americans can move to Mexico, right, to take jobs there. And that alleviates the structural unemployment problem in the US. But there's no way they are going to go to Mexico. But in theory, they can do that, right? Then you don't have the unemployment problem at home. Major limitation is with greater globalization, the economy becomes more vulnerable to changing economic conditions. So falling growth rates of trading partners translate into lower export revenues, negative change in investment sentiment, significant capital outflows, surge in foreign worker inflow, worsen unemployment in the economy if they are unable to find jobs, right? So those three things correspond to three branches of globalization. Thus, there could be periods where pursuing temporary protectionist measures could help to lower the rate of unemployment in the economy by protecting domestic industries from unfair trade practices or to prevent dumping. Nonetheless, permanently avoiding globalization will be unfavorable for employment, as lower free trade necessarily means lower rates of economic growth, and cyclical unemployment will become a significant issue due to a lack of AD in the economy. For a country like Singapore, it's unlikely that we'll be able to create enough jobs for as many people just by relying on our own domestic market. Our consistently low rate of unemployment is a direct consequence of being deeply integrated into the global economy. Yes?
Is it possible to talk about short-run protectionism in the
Yes.
first paragraph? Then you talk about retaliation and back-end labor in the second one.
Okay, so the point to note here is I talked about 2.5 policies, right? This is the one that you will cut short. But I gave you the whole thing again as a teaching point, so you can use it for future essays and all that. So the easy way is like what Dylan suggested. You could actually just talk about protectionism and the need to do protectionism in a globalized world in order to protect unemployment in the short run. So it's totally okay. I just went to talk about some of these points in more depth so that you can use it as a learning point. Okay? In evaluation, the governments have to employ a combination of fiscal and SSP, very standard, right? AD is the single most important factor in determining the level of cyclical unemployment in the economy, right? Why? Although supply side policies can give you actual growth, if your AD is not high enough, that will not happen, right? What are we talking about? Talking about this lah, right? By right, like that, you can create more jobs. But if your AD is here, it will not actually create more jobs. Conversely, fiscal policy cannot effectively alleviate the other types of unemployment, such as structural and frictional, unless it's directed towards improving the supply side of the economy. Thus, demand and supply side policies are both important in reducing the various types of unemployment that exists in the economy. Nonetheless, it is still important to embrace globalization to ensure a healthy, growing economy over the long term that can support more employment and tackle both cyclical and structural unemployment. However, there are instances where countries could benefit from temporary bouts of protectionist measures. Okay? Okay? So don't worry too much about the fancier things I try to do. I mean, there are things in there that are learning points. The main thing you need to focus on is the contextualization. Point selection, look at how I chose the limitations, how I link back, how I chose the factors, and you'll be fine. This is a very easy essay to score. Okay? 5. It's a nightmare that if you see it, you should run like hell. A comparable question came out, I think, in 2014. If you're curious, right, you can look for this question about investments in 2014. The question was, explain what is meant by capital investments, foreign direct investment, and human capital investment. That's the part A. Then the part B is discuss how governments will use policies to encourage these various types of investments. You see a question like that, run like hell. Why? You will never study this question in that format. So you need to come up with an essay structure on the spot. That's nuts. Don't do that. But of course, with this essay, what we're trying to teach you is if you have to do it, how to do it, how to create a balance in the question. Okay? So the first question is explain the link between SOL, cost of living, macroeconomic performance. Bloody nightmare, right? So when you see questions like that and you want to do it, because it doesn't have a standard structure, you need to be very clear about what the question is testing you on. So let's focus on what we know. The simple thing is, you have macro goals. You know that if you achieve your macro goals, it will definitely raise your standard of living. So that one you already know. Right? That's quite easy. So that's the spine of the essay already. The tricky part is how do we bring cost of living? Because we need to talk about the link between these three things. That's not enough. So how does COL come into the equation? They have a link here, right? Cost of living is inverse to standard of living. If cost of living is rising, standard of living falls, and vice versa. Generally. Why do I say generally? I'll tell you why later. Right? And then cost of living is related to inflation. Now, if you think hard about it, right? What's our macro goal for inflation? What's our objective for inflation? We want a low and stable rate of inflation. Which means that if we achieve our macro goals, what should happen to cost of living? It should rise. Okay? So you have to be very careful here. Rising cost of living, right, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Right? So you need to be very careful. That's where the trick of the question is. Because some people might write it as if, oh, we want a lower cost of living, not a lower cost of living. Actually, no. Cost of living rising is a very natural result of a country that achieves a macroeconomic objective. Okay? So that completes the link between the three things. But cost of living is the smallest piece, right, out of the three concepts you have to talk about. Okay. Okay, let's start. Cost of living refers to the cost of commonly purchased baskets of goods and services by households in a given economy in a given time. SOL refers to the well-being of an average person in an economy in a given time. Let me just emphasize this. Average person doesn't mean numerical average, right? Meaning, do not think that SOL can be directly estimated by GDP per capita. That's a mathematical average. When we say the average person here, we're using the word average in an English sense, not mathematical sense. Which means, okay, if you just take one person, one random person on the street, what's his standard of living like? So in mathematical terms, it's closer to the median, right? That's a more correct way of thinking about it. What's the SOL like for the median person in your economy? The macroeconomic performance of a country refers to the extent that the economy achieves the four macro goals. SOL of a country increases as the country achieves its macroeconomic objectives and cost of living normally rises in a healthy, growing economy. Cool? Now, the first paragraph is the most important paragraph. That's the paragraph that you cannot afford to cut. I'll tell you where you can actually trim down a little bit later on. SOL consists of material and non-material. Okay, material is defined as utility gain from households from consumption, non-material, intangible factors, quality of life, literacy rate, life expectancy. Primary macro indicators that drive SOL are economic growth and employment. The other two do not fundamentally drive standard of living. Why? Because your inflation rate, right, it raises cost of living. So that makes no sense as a standalone. I will tell you how it makes sense later on. Right, but we just focus on growth and employment because these are the two things that raises SOL. Even balance of payments has no direct link to standard of living. So EG refers to the increase in national income of the country in a given time, sum of all incomes earned in the economy from wages, rent, interest, and profits. Employment measures the number of people who are able and willing to work and can get jobs. So when national income and employment are rising, more people are able to earn an income and the general level of income earned is rising in the economy. We merge them together, then we talk about SOL. Why? Because their SOL factors overlap. So you don't have to repeat. Let's talk about them together. This leads to an increase in material as well, as more households can afford a greater amount of goods and services, as their purchasing power increases through employment and higher incomes. This leads to a rise in utility through greater consumption. Secondly, there's a greater ability to consume more merit goods, such as education and healthcare, and increases literacy rate and life expectancy. In addition, households could also have more leisure time as they have to worry less about making ends meet. All of these will lead to a rise in non-material SOL. So as usual, one material, one non-material, and then the last one is about the government. Government could earn more tax revenue through both direct and indirect taxes. As incomes and employment rise, households pay more income taxes under a progressive tax system with an increasing marginal tax rate. So the proper way to talk about the different steps in the income tax system is marginal tax rate. The marginal tax rate goes up. The extra tax paid on extra income is higher. That's what we mean by higher marginal tax rate. Okay, so even without rising incomes, the increase in employment would mean more taxpayers. Higher incomes also translates into higher expenditure in the economy, right? Because output equals to expenditure equals to income. So indirect taxes collection will go up as well. Higher tax revenues can mean more redistributive spending by the government to reduce income inequality through transfer payments as well as the free provision of merit goods. This raises the SOL of the average person as the income gap between high and low income group narrows. You see, this is why I emphasize to you, right, the average person is not a mathematical average. Because if it is, when I redistribute income, my per capita income stays the same. Because it's total income divided by total population, right? So then redistribution makes no sense, huh? How does it improve the SOL of the average person if it's mathematical average? It's not. Okay? And the lowest percentile in income distribution is also able to consume more goods and services than before. Okay? With a healthy growing economy with high income and employment, there will also be a rising cost of living due to the country experiencing a positive inflation rate. I thought long and hard about putting a diagram in here, but it just takes too much time, so I didn't. But if you want to know what this paragraph is going to talk about, it's actually talking about ideal growth. It's talking about why if you achieve your macro goals and you are a developed economy, you will definitely experience inflation. You know why? You know why developing countries can grow by so much more in their GDP? Because their starting point is very far away from YF. But as you get to a developed economy stage, you are getting very close to YF. So you keep having to create potential growth to grow, potential growth to grow, potential growth to grow, which is very hard to do, right? Because PG takes time. You can't lift technology or train workers overnight. But when you're a country like China 30, 40 years ago, you got so much land, so much people that are in the countryside, that you can just move them into the cities, throw them in the factories, and increase your GDP overnight. That's how you grow by 14, 15%, because you have so much idle resources waiting for you to tap on. But once you get to a developed stage, why do all developed economies grow at 2 to 3% a year? Because you're so near YF, right? Such that you cannot grow too much, otherwise you cause too much inflation. You cannot grow too fast because you can't create PG fast enough. This is the scenario that we are explaining here. This is what makes part A a bit tricky also. Because you can't bring out this scenario, you can't explain the link between goals and cost of living, and as well. Right. As the country's national income rises and approaches the full employment level of output, there's an increasing scarcity of FOP in the economy as employment peaks. As such, further increases in AD for goods and services in the economy leads to a shortage of goods and services as firms require rising price levels to increase output. Right? This is me explaining the intermediate range. Okay, this is because the income rising costs, the required scarce resources needed to expand production, temporary shortage of goods and services leads to some households bidding up prices to incentivize firms to increase production. This thus results in rising GPL and rising cost of living as the basket of goods and services most commonly bought by households will increase in price. You need to make the link from GPL to cost of living. This is how. Okay, so the part that says this results in rising GPL, blah blah blah, that line is important. As cost of living rises, SOL generally falls as it erodes the purchasing power of income, resulting in lower consumption of goods and services. Why did I say generally? Because of the next slide. However, SOL rises even as cost of living increases due to the increase in real incomes of households. That is income measured in terms of purchasing power. Of course, the assumption here is your nominal income growth must exceed your inflation rate. Okay? The least important paragraph in the whole essay is the next paragraph. You can compress this very substantially, simply because there's no direct link between BOP and SOL. Meaning, whether it's deficit or surplus, in a current or financial account, we can always find instances whereby they point good or bad. It really depends on the size, the persistence of the deficit or surplus, and how they come about to begin with. So this paragraph actually is very simple. It was just meant to say there's no direct link. But for teaching purposes, I've given you some illustrations of what I mean by there's no direct link. So, lastly, a country's BOP, little bearing, right? BOP records all, okay, that's its definitions and all that. Going down to the line that says, wow, a balance of payment deficit on the current account suggests weak net exports. That should translate into lower growth and employment, consequently depressing as well. A current account surplus could also be interpreted as negative for as well, as the low consumption of imports could lead to lower utility, correct? Similarly, the financial account is in deficit. That means outflow more than inflow. It could be interpreted that domestic investment is diverted away from the local economy abroad, resulting in lower rates of economic growth and employment, and lower as well. However, financial account surplus could also mean lower as well if it means excessive FDI leading to future income generated from these investments going to foreigners instead of domestic households. Right now, because when foreigners inflow means they own your companies, they buy bonds from you, that means they're lending you money, right? They put money in your bank accounts to earn interest, they buy real estate, all of these things generate income, and it goes to the foreigners, not to you. Okay? Simple. The last sentence, the conclusion is just a simple wrap up. A is still doable. B is the one that's very tricky. B looks okay. But if you do B as a simple macro goals question, you got a big issue. Because the preamble had three things. You're supposed to explain how we get to high SOL, not rising SOL. How we get to high SOL, high cost of living, and achieving all our macro goals over an extended period of time. So this affects your policy choice. Okay, of course your starting point is you think demand side, supply side. But here's where your traditional demand and supply side will not make for a very compelling read. Because first and foremost, let's talk about fiscal. Right? Because you're talking about high standard of living, right? The main focus is on what? We already established in part A, right? It's about growth and employment. So you realize that this essay focuses very heavily on growth and employment. Right? Growth and employment that can be high as well. Then you ask yourself, Singapore realistically, you can use FP to drive economic growth? Cannot. So once you reach the contextualization part of your answer, you're screwed. Right? What are you going to say to make it convincing? Right? That, oh, part of our success was fiscal policy. That makes absolutely no sense. That is at best a short-term mitigation measure, right? What about exchange rate policy? That's to combat inflation. Is that useful? That is to make sure that our cost of living doesn't rise too fast, too much, too high. So there's maybe some role in that. We can't use monetary policy. What about SSP? Is SSP good? Yes, SSP is great. It's important. It helps us to achieve our macro goals. But does it really explain how we get our SOL rising to where it is today? No. So what's the missing piece? Then you need to draw on what Singapore really did. Singapore tried to globalize from day one. We grew based on exports growth, because the more FTAs you sign, the more markets you can sell to, the more your exports will rise every single year. The more FTAs you sign, the more you attract global companies to invest here, the more you attract FDI, the more you can grow. But that's not enough. Because if we had our original population, which I think post-independence was about 1 million plus, you will never grow to the size that you are today. Right? If you know our latest population statistics, we have 5.5 million, of which close to 40% are foreigners. Our domestic population is only 3 over million, if I'm not mistaken. So another big part of that equation is that our FTAs also brought in foreign labor inflows. Right? And then FDIs allow us to invest as a country, the investments in the country to grow at a rate beyond what we could do on our own. The way to think about it is very easy. If you are a developing country and you're really impoverished, like maybe some sub-Saharan country, you want to invest, you want to have you might have problems because all the banks add up might not even have enough money to do the investment. So that's why FDI is important, because foreign firms bring money here to invest here. Right? So you don't need to depend on your domestic savings rate. Otherwise you'll be constrained by your domestic savings rate, right? And if your economy is starting out as developing, you're poor and impoverished, there's not much savings fund, there's not much loanable funds, how are you going to grow? So the FDI is like rocket fuel. It helps you to grow a lot faster than you could have on your own. So this essay, you cannot run away from talking about trade and globalization. That's what makes the question tricky. It's all about the contextualization. That's your biggest enemy. That's why you need to choose policies in this fashion. Okay? And bottom of page 9. Singapore's achievement of a high SOL, high cost of living, as well as a strong macro performance overall, is a result of the extensive FTA she has signed with numerous countries around the world, consistent use of SSP, and a gradual and modest appreciation of the Sing dollar under a managed float system. FTAs liberalize trade, labor flows, and capital flows between Singapore and the trading partners through the reduction and removal of trade barriers, loosening immigration, and opening up financial markets to foreign investments. By liberalizing trade, Singapore has greater access to foreign markets that are significantly larger than the domestic market. As tariffs on Singapore exports are removed, this raises export demand as Singapore's exports become relatively cheaper in these foreign markets and foreign consumers buy more Singaporean goods and services. Rise in export demand leads to rising export revenue, raise X minus M, raise AD, raise national income and employment through the multiplier effect. Which I then explained, given an initial increase in AD, rising national income leads to induced consumption, leads to further increase in national output, and increases the derived demand for labor. So that takes care of the trade part. So the mechanism, we just do it in a bit more detail once. You will see me doing it briefly subsequently. Financial flows in the form of FDI also leads to increases in AD and national income as foreign funds flow in to purchase capital goods in Singapore in the form of new factory construction or the setting up of high-tech manufacturing lines such as Dyson. Dyson traditionally made hair dryers. Actually, before that was vacuum cleaner, but their hair dryer is really, really nice. If you haven't seen it yet, it costs a bomb too. It costs $600, more expensive than some smartphones, but it's really nice. They're going to electric cars. The news is that they are going to start production in 2023. That's very, very, very soon. That's like 4 years' time. They're going to start releasing electric cars, which is quite cool. Don't know how much it will cost here because there's no import duties, right? But we'll see. As the investment component of AD rises, national income and employment rises. Lastly, labor flows also contributes to rising AD as consumption rises as the domestic population expands. You got people working here, you got people living here, they're going to buy more goods and services here, they're going to go to NTUC and all that. That's going to lead to a rise in C. Cool? So this whole paragraph is all about the AD aspect of signing FTAs. Labor and investment inflows also contribute to potential growth. So this is the PG part, which is an increase in the maximum productive capacity of the economy. The rise in productive capacity manifests through a rise in LRAS, which increases the full employment level of output in the economy. This next line is the important part. This is why we need PG. PG by itself does nothing for you, but PG allows AG to continue. You follow the line of reasoning? It allows you to produce more and more. Right? What a lot of people don't realize is this. If you don't have potential growth, right, your growth rate actually drops to 0 because as you climb the vertical range, your y starts here, you're stuck here. So your growth rate is actually 0. Right? In fact, real GDP growth will actually start falling because your inflation goes up, but your nominal level of output stays constant. Right? Okay, so translate into continuously rising national income without suffering from a high rate of inflation. Labour inflows increases the quantity of labour in Singapore, allowing us to produce more goods and services with more resources. This could also raise the average quality of labour in Singapore should workers coming be highly skilled or if low-skilled foreign labour frees up local workers to upskill and improve themselves. FDI, it results in an increase in capital stock in the Singapore economy and allows us to produce more goods and services with more infrastructure and machinery. Together, so this paragraph ties it all together. The increase in AD and LRAS will lead to sustained economic growth in the Singapore economy over the decades since independence, resulting in rising SOL in both material and non-material aspects, as employment and national income continuously rises. I don't even bother going into the why because we've done that in part A. At the same time, as Singapore moves closer and closer to a full productive capacity, there will inevitably be a scarcity of resources such as land and labour, resulting in rising GPL and cost of living over time. The prolonged economic growth will thus have also contributed to rising cost of living over time. Rising cost of living. Nonetheless, with FTAs, Singapore will have achieved great macroeconomic success through high economic growth rates, low unemployment rates, as well as a healthy balance of payments as she exports more than imports and is able to run a consistent current account surplus. Okay, so that covers all our macro goals. So we do a very detailed mechanism, link back once, then we don't keep repeating the same thing later on in the essay. We just focus on policy. However, FTAs do not just have positive effects. Now, quick note, this question is also screwed up, right? Because it doesn't require you to do the pros and cons like normal. They ask you, discuss what policies we have used to get to where we are today. So any policy, right, that doesn't affect this path to high SOL and goals and all that isn't really relevant. Like you bring things like multiply and crowding out, it's like, yeah, but that's a temporary problem, right? But this part about FTAs is important because the FTA could have actually compromised our journey to where we are. So I have it. But later on you will see that I have very little other limitations. So again, that's why I say the question has been screwed up, right? The structure is not very standard. However, FTAs do not just have positive effects. Freer trade could also lead to higher imports in Singapore due to greater import substitution as locals switch to relatively cheaper foreign imports as tariffs get removed. Singapore used to have numerous farms and manufacturing companies in Singapore producing food and other goods, such as cars. However, as tariffs get lifted, cheaper foreign imports flooded the market, resulting in the displacement of these industries, resulting in a falling AD, national income, and rising structural and cyclical unemployment. This led to the widespread shutdown of such industries, hurting SOL and Singapore's macro objectives. Also, labour inflows lead to an increase in supply of labour in the domestic job market, leading to downward pressure on wages due to the surplus of workers at the original wage level. I'm just describing the mechanism when supply rises. Surplus will cause wages to fall. Okay, that's what I'm describing there. In light of these challenges, lower wages will depress the SOL of workers as they earn less income and have less purchasing power. In light of these challenges, it is thus important that the Singapore government also utilize SSP. So this is what I use to bridge into supply side policies. So the truth is, if we really just distill it right, our economic success is really FTAs plus SSP. That's the most important thing. Fiscal and exchange rate is just for stabilization purposes. They will never be able to meaningfully create the growth that we have created today. Supply side policies consist of interventionist policies as well as market-oriented policies. In light of the problems from extensive FTAs, the Singapore government has invested heavily into education and training for workers to ensure that they have the necessary skills to find high-quality jobs with higher wages. In earlier years, the Singapore government invested heavily in a robust educational system where students are able to attend vocational schools, you got IT, you got poly, which is kind of a hybrid, and then you have universities, right, according to their career inclinations. These different pathways lead to a diverse and highly skilled labor force. They are able to find employment in industries that Singapore has competitiveness and comparative advantages in, such as finance and high-end manufacturing. Having a highly skilled labor force has also reinforced our attractiveness for FDI, reinforcing our strong AD growth over the years as I increased from foreign inflows, raising economic growth, employment, and as well. This is what I mean by I did the mechanism once, I'm not repeating it anymore. There's no time to keep saying the same thing again and again and again. Another thing you notice is that this is very classic SSP, right? Where what you say in the answer really depends on what problems you're trying to solve. There is no fixed formula for SSP. The only thing that's fixed is like education and training. What you say after that really depends on the problem you're trying to fix. Okay? Increase in LRAS as the quantity and quality of skilled labor resources increases also helps to sustain economic growth as AD rises. On the other hand, the government has always spent heavily on R&D, such as the $19 billion National Research Foundation set up recently. I think it might be fund, I can't remember. But basically the NRF. R&D drives innovation and develops new comparative advantages for Singapore as certain industries decline as a result of liberalizing trade. So my SSP is very in tune with why this needs to go alongside FTAs. You got FTAs, you got growth, good. SSP is there to make sure that we can keep reaping the benefits from growth. Singapore's positioning as an oil trading hub, a financial hub, and a high-end manufacturing hub are all results of the government's embrace of technological advancement, as Singapore specializes in oil refining, which is actually the most high-tech part of the entire oil production process. Which, I mean, we are quite hardcore, we also have the drilling and all that, so we also extract oil. But regionally speaking, right, basically all the oil in the region gets sucked here to get refined. That's what Jurong Island is for. Right? That's why all the big oil and gas companies are here. We do a lot of the refining work. And that's high-tech work. That's not low-skilled work. Okay? Specializes in oil refining, financial technology, as well as precision engineering in areas such as silicon chips and pharmaceuticals. This helps to drive X-M despite increased foreign competition from lower tariffs and creates employment for a growing and highly skilled labor force. At the same time, X-M growth also leads to AD rising and raising national income through the multiplier effect. Technological advancement also contributes to continued potential growth as FOPs are being utilized more efficiently than before, raising maximum productive capacity in the economy. Okay? The government has also deployed market-oriented SSP through the privatization of previously nationalized industries such as telecommunications, as well as encouraging small business startups through grants, subsidies, and tax breaks. The increased reliance on the private sector has led to more innovation and efficiency gains, as privatized firms and small startups are incentivized by profits to create better products, better production methods, and cut costs. This also contributes to Singapore's export competitiveness and increases our attractiveness as a destination for FDI. Our export quality could improve through innovation and price competitiveness. These 2 points, the innovation and price competitiveness, corresponds to the earlier part about incentivized by profits. Incentivized by profits, so you better product, better production method, cut costs, drives export competitiveness. Okay, boosting X-M and AD. Low taxes and a free market environment that rewards entrepreneurship and risk-taking would also attract FDI. The recent development of Block 71 at Buona Vista as our startup hub to encourage new businesses is a prime example of this. Okay, so what you notice is that this coming paragraph is basically mashing the limitation of SSP with the need for exchange rate policy. So my exchange rate policy is my half policy that I talked about. If you were going for a more balanced essay in terms of length, then your globalization part will be compressed. You might not talk so much about labor inflows and capital inflows, and you let supply side policy take care of the LRAS side. You get what I mean? Because the reason why I say is this length is because my free trade agreements and my SSP are both very comprehensive. Both of them took care of both my LRAS and AD points in driving growth and as well. Right, but if you want to do a more standard structure, then you'll trim it down a little bit. You might just focus on the trade part of globalization, you do your standard SSP, and then you bring in a third demand side policy, which is fine as well. This essay is very fluid because of how broad it is and how unorthodox it is. You have a lot of freedom as to how you might try to structure it, but the major pieces must be in place. However, supply side policies and FTAs alone would not be sufficient to allow Singapore to achieve her macroeconomic goals and raise SOL over time. While rising cost of living is an inevitable feature of a developed economy, that is producing close to its full employment level of output and experiences resource scarcity, it is important to keep the rate of inflation low and stable so as to ensure national income growth could outpace cost of living increases in order to raise standard of living. Now, starting yesterday's class, this sentence is terrible, it's way too long. But as I was typing, I didn't realize. Right, so the whole point is, rising cost of living inevitable, right? Because you'll be facing supply bottlenecks and all that. So you actually need measures to also bring down your inflation rate, is what I'm saying. Okay, so to make sure that you have a low stable rate of inflation so that your real GDP growth will be positive, and that is what raises it as well, right? Singapore's use of gradual and modest appreciation of the Sing dollar against a basket of currencies is extremely important in ensuring cost of living increases remain modest. So the key thing to note here is this: we are okay with cost of living rising, but we are not okay with it rise too fast. Okay? Due to a lack of natural resources, Singapore is extremely dependent on foreign imported factors of production. As our trading partners also experience economic growth and world income rise, factor prices will also increase as GPL in these economies increase. Logical, right? If your trading partners' economies are doing well, their GPL will go up also. So your imported FOB from them will go up, for sure. So you need to keep appreciating to make sure that they remain cheap. Thus, it is important to ensure that the Singapore dollar continuously appreciates to ensure that such imported factors of production remain affordable in order to prevent cost-push inflation that could erode export competitiveness and SOL. While supply-side policies and labour inflows from FTAs would ensure LRAS growth that lowers the rate of inflation as resource bottlenecks are eased. Why I say resource bottlenecks are eased is because when your LRAS rise, you are pushing out your intermediate range. Right, so you don't experience the bottleneck so early. They are unreliable as short-term solutions to manage inflation risks that could arise due to short-term shocks, such as war disrupting oil supplies. Thus, exchange rate policies are important in ensuring a low and stable rate of inflation in Singapore and allowing SOL to rise over time. Can you realize there's no limitation? Now, I was studying yesterday's class, right? Like SSP also didn't bring much limitations. Why? For Singapore to get to where she is today, does it matter that there's a time lag in SSP or that there's indeterminate outcomes? Can you not use it? Cannot, right? You still have to use, right? So you bring limitations for what? That's my argument, okay? In evaluation, Singapore's transformation into an economy that has achieved macro success, high SOL and cost of living, is a result of extensive FTAs that she has signed, a consistent utilization of SSP, as well as a gradually appreciating currency. So this is where you do a lot of the contextualization, okay? FTAs are essential to explaining Singapore's economic growth and employment over the years as the small domestic market. This is where you score your evaluation marks. Small domestic market, small domestic labour force, lack of natural resources mean we could not achieve high national income and employment by being a self-sufficient economy. Attracting foreign labour and capital flows were essential to increase Singapore's maximum productive capacity, as is her dependence on exports in driving AD to increase actual growth consistently over time. Supply-side policies ensure that in such an open economy, Singapore maintains key competitiveness in terms of export quality and pricing, attractiveness to capital and labour flows, as well as a tool to mitigate negative consequences of signing FTAs. Lastly, exchange rate policy ensures short-run achievement of a low and stable rate of inflation that is essential to maintain export competitiveness and foreign investor confidence, as well as to maintain Singapore's SOL. Ken? Terrible question, don't ever do it. Okay, last question. Back to something really easy. Okay. 6B is a little bit tricky, so I'll spend a bit more time on 6B. I'll talk about 6A quickly. 6A is internal and external factors that are likely to have contributed to the slowdown in economic growth rate. Okay? So you just need to be mindful. You need external and internal factors, and then as usual you need AD, SRAS, LRAS. Right? So when you just explain each one of them, you just need domestic and internal and external factors. Now just bear in mind, slowing growth rate, technically speaking, looks something like that. This is slowing growth rate. The increase is bigger, then it got smaller. But this is a bloody nightmare to explain, right? How do you explain this factor? Oh, C is rising, but wealth is not rising as much. That's very hard to explain, right? So we don't do that. We do it the easy way. You will draw this, and you will say, for example, AD could be falling because there's a fall in wealth. But that's just one component, right? Causing AD to fall once. But there are other components that could be causing AD to rise. That's the scenario we're trying to paint. Slowing growth means my AD is rising, right? But there's one component that dropped. So overall, my increase is not by that much. Okay? Remember that. It's just like what I always teach you about inflation. Right? When we do inflation, we draw this, right? Does it mean we want deflation and recession? No. We're using this to show, okay, if one component is dropping, AD will fall, GPL will fall. This reduces inflationary pressures. Right? It reduces the likelihood that GPL will rise by a lot overall. Same idea here. Slowing growth by right is like that. But you draw this, you will kill yourself. How do you explain this? So you don't draw this, you draw this, and then you just explain that, okay, if AD is falling, right, because of this one change, then overall, it could lead to slowing growth rates. Because you got Y falling because of one component, so overall, it might not be rising that much. So one easy way to think about it is, you have C falling, for instance, right? But then, you have GIX rising. So we're trying to say the net effect is a modest increase in Y. Right, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so later in the essay, you can see how I do it. But that's the main thing you want to pay attention to. Okay? Okay, let's jump into the essay. Economic growth rate refers to the rate of increase in actual economic output produced in an economy in a given time, normally a quarter or a year. This is normally measured using GDP, total value of final goods and services produced in an economy in a given time. Slowdown in economic growth rate suggests that Singapore's economy is still increasing in terms of nominal economic output produced, but this rate of increase is now lower. This is likely to be due to a combination of demand and supply side factors. Firstly, a lower rate of economic growth could have been caused by a fall in domestic investments, which is the purchase of capital goods or spending by firms to accumulate more inventories. I is a component of AD, defined as total amount of desired spending on final goods and services in an economy in a given time. AD is equal to CGIX minus M, and then you just explain the components. For an I, see this part? This is my domestic factor. For an I, perhaps due to a negative change in investor confidence, will have led to a fall in AD. The follow-up sentence is important because the follow-up sentence explains why there's a negative change in sentiment. Otherwise, you'll be lacking that. Okay, and then I drew figure 1. Okay, I'm not going to read through this part. Basically, the paragraph after figure 1, that's mechanism. Go study that. You need to be proficient at explaining that by now. Let's go to the next page. Okay, the top paragraph on the next page, the most important line is the last 2 sentences. The fall in national income would have translated into a fall in economic growth rate, assuming that there's still a net positive change in AD in the given time period. Which is exactly what I was explaining to you. That means overall, right, you want slowing growth rate, means growth rate is positive. How is growth rate positive? Is when one component drops but other components are still rising. So net increase in AD. Sorry, net increase in AD. In this case, the factor causing the slowing growth will be a domestic one. Such a scenario could also be caused by external factors such as a fall in national income of a trading partner. We talked about this in detail just now, I'm not going to repeat. It's very easy. Basically, foreign incomes drop, they buy less exports from you, AD goes down. Okay, same mechanism. Slowing economic growth rate could also be a consequence of a fall in the SRAS due to a rise in aggregate cost of production in the economy. Okay, so same idea, right? We illustrated a fall in Y, right? But we're trying to say that it could lead to a fall in economic growth rate if overall Y is still rising. When aggregate COP rises, firms require higher GPL to produce the same amount of output in order to maintain their profitability, and so your SRAS shifts up. Fall in real national income from Y0 to Y1, again the fall will lead to a fall in economic growth rate. Rise in aggregate COP could also be the result of domestic or external factors. Domestic will include a rise in wages because of shrinking foreign worker quotas. The need to a fall in supply of workers, causing wages to rise. External factors will be imported cost push inflation, rise in cost of imported raw materials such as oil, resulting from geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East. Lastly, LRAS. Right, the good thing about LRAS is we don't actually even need LRAS to move. As long as your RRF is stagnant, you're going to get falling growth rate. You're going to go from Y0 to Y1 and you're going to get stuck there. So your growth rate will drop to 0. You don't even need it to grow. Okay, so let's talk about stagnation. So let's talk about why it might stagnate. Right? Could be due to a lack of improvement, just the last 3 lines. Lack of improvement in domestic labor quality or fall in foreign investments that resulted in slowing growth in capital stock in the economy.
You can talk about aging population.
Huh?
You can talk about aging.
Can talk about aging population too. Okay, part A is very simple. Cannot screw up one up. Basically a 9 out of 10 essay, if you ask me. B, the main thing here you need to be mindful of is the word difficulties. So nowadays, right, they like to trap you with little words like that. You ignore the little words, it will kill your essay. Because you'll never cross L2. So one example is this. Discuss the extent of your cost difficulty. So it's standard, yes, it's pros and cons. Where this affects you is you need to talk about the cons. So for example, multiplier, small multiplier with fiscal policy, that doesn't cause you difficulties in the economy. But it causes difficulty if it necessitates that you spend more money and run a bigger deficit in order to jumpstart your economy. Because if you have to run a bigger deficit and borrow more money, you will have a bigger repayment burden in the future. That is the difficulty that you will face. The multiplier itself is not. So it's similar points, quite a standard essay still. You just need to be mindful of how you link back to the concept of difficulty. So difficulty can be trade-off, it can be income inequality, it can be government budget deficit, it can be anything. But you need to be explicit about what the difficulty is. Okay, so this one I went with the standard route. I did fiscal, supply side, and exchange rate. Okay, page 15. To increase the economic growth rate in Singapore, policies must target both actual and potential economic growth, increasing both real national income as well as the maximum productive capacity of the economy. The policies that can increase Singapore's growth rate include fiscal, exchange rate, and supply side. Difficulties of the Singapore economy would manifest in the form of macro problems, other negative consequences that eventually hurts SOL in the economy. So that's where the budget deficit and income inequality comes in. Firstly, the government will adopt expansionary FP. Yeah, didn't you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to repeat this. This is again the standard textbook explanation of FP, right? Copy and paste. If you still cannot remember, then you should try to memorize this. We're going to focus on the negative consequences. Negative consequences that could arise from expansionary FP. Firstly, there's likely to be a problem of time lag, because time lag will cause difficulties. As the approval of fiscal spending requires parliamentary approval, long and bureaucratic, starts with the government identifying the problem, all the value funds are actually injected. The time taken for this process could run up to months, will limit the effectiveness of using FP to raise the rate of economic growth. That's still not a difficulty. The difficulty comes next. Should the time lag result in the expansionary FP coinciding with a period of economic recovery, it could cause a large and sudden increase in Singapore's inflation rate, resulting in macroeconomic instability from high and unstable inflation. That is a difficulty. This is particularly an issue if Singapore were already producing close to a full employment level of output and the low rate of economic growth was due to a low rate of potential growth. Right? Because if you scroll up, you look at the question again. They're asking you, you want to raise growth rate, right? Then your growth rate low, you want to raise. So this is a potential problem, right? Your growth rate could be low because of PG related issues. So if you're facing PG issues and your fiscal policy timing is off, you're dead. Okay, next, lastly, Singapore's small multiplier due to an import dependence and mandatory savings scheme could mean that the government might need to run a significantly large fiscal deficit in order to stimulate growth. This could translate into high up costs as the government is forced to cut back on other important areas of spending such as healthcare and education. To stimulate potential growth and prevent inflationary pressures, the Singapore government will have used SSP. SSP include interventionist and market-oriented measures and mainly target the improvement of the productive capacity of the economy, which increases the full employment level of output. Interventionist SSP involves spending by the government intervening in the economy to bring about the desired changes. So you see the examples are all the same. Government can spend money to set up research institutions and programs such as the 19 billion for the National Research Foundation to encourage R&D and technological advancement in Singapore. This has the effect of stimulating an increase in the long run aggregate supply curve, increasing the productive capacity and generate economic growth as long as AD is sufficiently high. The increase in LRAS alleviates the bottleneck of resources associated with producing in the intermediate range and allows firms to increase output on aggregate at lower GPL. This alleviates, of course, inflation. Market-oriented policies, on the other hand, involve regulatory changes in product and labor markets to reduce market friction and encourage innovation and efficiency. For instance, encouraging entrepreneurs to invest and start companies through tax breaks and government support programs will lead to an increase in the number of innovative startups in Singapore. Such nimble and small companies have the advantage of being highly innovative in their approach to solving problems in various markets. Large tech companies such as Apple and Google will want startups as well. Stronger startup scene, more innovation, more research, more investments in infrastructure, stimulate our RAS growth. Okay? Biggest setback with such supply side policies is the structural unemployment that could arise with a rapidly changing and transforming economy. Why not uncertainty? Why not time lag? Because these two things don't really create. The uncertainty, yes. Time lag doesn't really create difficulties for the economy, right? As it is, supply side policies take a long time. It's not a great explanation to use. So we went with, if you use supply side policies and you keep transforming your economy, structural unemployment is a very real and very big pain. It also helps that it's a trade-off, so that it's a bit economically more rigorous. While a higher rate of economic growth will be achieved, the spoils of such growth is unlikely to be fairly shared across the economy. Those with relevant skills and access to educational and job opportunities will benefit, while those who do not will get left behind, leading to rising income inequality. Secondly, supply side policies will be costly and yet not assured in yielding desired outcomes. So the key emphasis here is not that it's uncertain, but that the uncertainty costs you a lot of money and it creates op costs. Right? There's no assurance that you will be in companies that could truly help the country's economic growth. So that's the difficulty. The difficulty is that you're going to waste money that could have been better spent elsewhere. Lastly, the central bank has the option of depreciating the Singapore dollar in order to boost economic growth. A depreciation will involve MAS selling Singapore dollars in the foreign exchange market in order to lower the price of Singapore dollars relative to a basket of foreign currencies. As Sing dollar depreciates, the price of our exports in foreign currency falls, while the price of imports in domestic currency increases. I need to see this phrase, okay? Assuming Marshall Lerner condition holds, where the sum of PDX and PDM is more than 1, you want to save time, just write it like that. This will lead to a rise in net exports, since foreigners will buy more of our products. Exports as it gets cheaper in their domestic currency. This part's all important, this is all the mechanism. While Singaporeans will switch to local products as imports get costlier in Singapore dollars. Rise in export will raise AD, which in turn leads to a multiplied increase in real national income that boosts the rate of economic growth. However, the biggest weakness of depreciating the Singapore dollar is the risk of imported cost inflation. That's a very real difficulty, a very real problem. As imports get costlier, the cost of imported raw materials such as oil and food also rises. This could raise the aggregate cost of production in Singapore that leads to a fall in the SRAS curve, which will lead to stagflation. As the rate of inflation increases with a higher GPL, and yet economic growth will fall and unemployment rate will rise. Right, so it's just like that. Right, that's a stagflation. Okay. Due to Singapore's heavy reliance on imported raw materials and high import content in our exports, it's likely that such a fall in SRAS is likely to outweigh any potential benefits from a rise in X minus M. So we're referring to this movement, right? I always told you that in the Singapore's case, if you depreciate, you will get this very big shift like that, but your AD increase could only be modest. right? So overall, it'll still be bad. Okay? So instead of going here, you still see a fall in Y, even if your AD were to increase. Okay? Even if AD were to rise, you just end up there. There's still a net decrease in national income. So it's not worth it. We will never realistically depreciate in order to boost economic growth. Okay? Secondly, as one of Asia's top financial centers, Singapore is highly vulnerable to capital outflows due to a loss of investor confidence. A depreciation could precipitate such a decline in investor confidence if they anticipate weaker macro conditions in Singapore and worsening business prospects. The outflows will result in further depreciation in the Singapore dollar, intensifying inflationary pressures from costlier imports, as well as a fall in investment that could further weaken economic growth. You know what this means? Basically, if you depreciate, right? When you depreciate, you immediately reduce foreign investment returns. Foreign investors investing in your country will get less money back when they convert it back to their own currency. So this is already a problem, right? So this will scare them. If they expect more depreciation in future, either because of central bank action to boost growth, or they expect other investors to want to outflow, want to exit, or less investors want to come in, there's going to be a rush to the exits. Everyone will be rushing to sell their investments. People will stop wanting to invest in Singapore, and you'll get this massive crunch in foreign direct investments, which is very, very bad for the economy, of course. Okay? Yeah? Any questions so far? In evaluation, each macro policy that could be potentially employed may result in some difficulties in the Singapore economy. Thus, it's essential to employ a combination of fiscal and supply-side policies in order to raise the rate of economic growth, yet mitigate the potential negative consequences. A temporary depreciation of the Singapore dollar could provide a short-term boost to the economy, while fiscal policy is being debated. So as usual, here's where we talk about combination of policies, talk about how they can move hand in hand. In practice, the MAS is likely to adopt a zero appreciation stance and allow the Singapore dollar to drift lower within its allowed band. So MAS will never depreciate, but what they allow is they won't move the band up. So they allow the currency to go lower to the lower bound of the band. Right? So kind of like natural depreciation in order to boost exports. This will buy the government time to consider expansionary fiscal policy, while cheaper export provide a short-term boost to the economy. If fiscal policy is deployed to benefit the supply side of the economy, in terms of R&D or education and training, this could mitigate the negative sentiments that might result from the depreciation of the currency. Okay? Ultimately, trade-offs in policy making is inevitable, and it's thus essential to manage the timing of various policies, as well as deploying a complementary suite of solutions to manage these negative consequences. Finally, it's also important to deploy redistributive policies that mitigate the rising income inequality that could arise as the economy achieves a higher rate of economic growth. Wow, I ended ahead of time. Questions? You can ask me anything, like from the earlier essay also. Questions? Cannot be no questions on that. Dylan?
Yeah.
Anything?
Can you like explain like the difference between like the difficulty the differences between like difficulties and limitations again?
Okay, so let's put it this way. So I always teach you that there are three kinds of limitations, right? There's the general one, right? There's a goal specific, and then there's trade-offs. Actually, the ones that are most relevant, that's most relevant for difficulties is this. Because whenever there's a trade-off, it will create a difficulty. Make sense? So I use FP to pursue growth by cost inflation, that's a very obvious difficulty, that's a very obvious trade-off right there. So in talking about trade-offs, the most important thing is you must make sure you paint a very clear scenario of why the trade-off will occur. That's what affects the quality of your answer. Now, the bigger problem is with things like general limitations. On their own, they don't really sound like problems because general limitations stop the policy from working. So stopping the policy from working doesn't cause a difficulty. It just doesn't allow you to solve the problem. You get what I mean? You follow? General limitations stop policy from working. Meaning the outcome is generally just that you can't solve the problem. That's not a difficulty one. The difficulty is really there. It's not a result of your policy. But you could link it, like I said, for example, small multiplier. If small multiplier means you need to spend more money and borrow more money to boost the economy, that is a difficulty. So it affects the budget deficit, for instance. So that's the way you need to think about how you link. So I guess the general rule of thumb is difficulties, trade-offs. That fits very nicely. But there are other things you need to bring in. And when you bring in these other things, you need to go one step further and explain how does this problem that impedes the policy from working cause difficulties. That's a good question. Some more?
I thought you would answer it like a standard policy and uncommon question. Then the globalization part, you could just I thought about it in evaluation.
Then my question is, what will you say in evaluation for the globalization part?
I'll say that SSP is the most important out of all parameters. Because in globalized world, you have a lot of general algorithms, so your SSP you need it for long run.
Okay, so that's the thing, right? So in what you suggested, that's the structural unemployment SSP. But the truth is globalization permeates almost every single cause and every single solution. Like there's a reason why you will use sorry, I can't remember what I said. Yeah, so like even for globalization, right? FP is super important because you will face ups and downs because of X, Y, and Z. So FP is important in the context of globalized world. SSP is important in the context of globalized world. So there's free trade. So I wouldn't leave all for evaluation simply because there's too much to say. Like there's so much globalization pieces that are relevant throughout the essay. They're just putting it all at the back kind of will affect a little bit of fluency as well. And it might not give you as high a mark because it sounds like your whole essay in the body is divorced from globalization context. So because it's such a big concept, like it's not like a word difficulty, right? Difficulty is just an English word that they use to kind of force you to talk about certain kind of policies. But globalization is an economic term. You're expected to know it in a lot of detail. They actually permeate every single aspect of your essay. So it's better to have it throughout the essay. Otherwise, if it sounds sterile, right, you get marked down. If it sounds like it's unrelated to globalization and you just write everything first and park it at the back, it's going to be a problem.
So as long as there's a word like globalization, you should talk about trade, capital.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
Yeah, all the time. And then of course there is the link between globalization and firms as well. I'd like to ask that question. So of course, because that's a micro question, then you don't need to talk about globalization that much. But you just borrow some knowledge and talk about how globalization could either raise or lower demand for firms. It could lead to more expensive or cheaper FOP for firms as well. It really depends. Sorry? Oh no, I'll go with the easier ones. Like I will talk about things like labor flows is one of them, or just simply if you reduce tariffs, then you can get imported raw materials for cheaper. That's such an easy point. Then if you want to talk about how a globalized world could lead to higher cost, then it would be that if everyone's globalized, right, then there's a very high international demand for certain raw materials, and that bids up international raw material prices. So oil, metals, and all that gets more expensive because everyone's fighting over the same pool of resources. Then of course, the demand side, right? Globalization can cause firms to rise to get higher demand or lower demand depending on what you sell. What you sell, are you competitive? Do you appeal to taste and preferences and stuff like that? Okay, come on. Anything from the back? Jolene?
I ask a question that's not related.
Can.
Like appreciation will lead to hot money inflows, but then FDI will go down, right? Because it is more expensive to invest. Then what's the net outcome?
Okay, good question. So her question is actually, you're doing this. The question is actually, how does changes in exchange rate affect financial account? Right? That's actually really the question. And the answer is we don't know. The answer is there's no definite relationship between exchange rate and financial account. There is with current account, assuming the Marshall Lerner condition holds and the Jacob condition. But there's no direct link here. The simple example of this, right? Let's just talk about appreciation and FDI. When you got appreciation, right, it can mean two things. FDI goes up because they get more optimistic, or FDI goes down because it gets more expensive. How do you say which is which? You don't know. You see? Even for hot money can go up, right? Because they think that their exchange rate might keep going up. But hot money might go down because it just gets more expensive, right? To put money in your country. So I need to use more of my domestic currency to buy more of your currency. I might not get an equivalent amount in return, even though you pay me a higher interest rate, right? So the short answer is we don't actually know. There's no way to definitely say how will exchange rate affect financial account. The only thing we can say is this: in the long run, right? That means over an extended period of time, if you want to attract financial account inflows, you need appreciating exchange rate over time. Plus, of course, stability. You cannot go like that. Because why? Because at the end of the day, all types of investments, not just FDI, stocks and bonds, hot money, everyone wants to make money. To make money, they need to have visibility on how much they think they can get back. They need a certainty. So you need stability. And generally, if people are to invest in your country, they must at least think that either your currency will stay constant or it must be gradually appreciating over time. That is worth investing in your country. So we can tell you long run, for sure it has to be like that. Short run, anything goes. It's very hard to say. It depends on what's causing the exchange rate to change as well. Okay? That's a good question also. Come on. No, I think, I think. Don't feel compelled to last time. Yeah.
Usually talk about LRA shifting left.
When do you talk about LRA shifting to the left? What do I always say? Almost never. We hardly talk about LRA shifting left simply because it's very hard for the productive capacity of an economy to fall. And the outcome is very drastic. The outcome is very unrealistic because if LRS is falling, then you're going to get deflation, you're going to get recession, and that doesn't really happen. What happens more in real life is that your LRAS will stagnate. Right? And one of the biggest reasons I always talk about is, even if we think about aging population, right? People always think aging population means shrinking labor force. That is true, but not now, not next year, not at least for another 20, 30 years. Because for your aging population to cause shrinking labor force, the key equation you need to look at is entry minus exit. How many people entering the labor force every year and how many people getting out? So it has to do with the number of graduates that you have, the number of immigrants that come in, minus the number of retirees. So of course the whole problem is that with an aging population, your pyramid is inverting, so you got lesser and lesser people coming in and more people going out. Right? Because the cohort size is different. Just for example, when I took PSLE, we had like close to 50,000 kids in my batch. I think the number is like 40 grand now. So like, I mean, so someone like, 10, 16 years-ish younger than me, by the time we go to retirement, it's like 40,000 people exiting the labor force, but only like maybe 20,000 people, 30,000 people coming in. So eventually it will lead to shrinking, but it doesn't happen now. It takes time. So that's one reason, right? If you kind of zoom out and think at a higher level, every economy are training people to join the labor force. There's always opening doors to immigrants. There's always technological advancement going on. They're always trying to improve productivity. There's so many moving pieces. So it's very hard for just one single LRAS factor to cause LRAS to fall. At best, it causes stagnation because you're not really successful in doing what you're doing. But it's very unlikely that it causes a fall. Okay? Come on. Anything? If not, I'll let you go. Can you remember to do two things for me? No, not two things, just one thing. Just remember RSVP for Monday's class first. Okay? I'm not seeing you next 2 weekends. Good luck for GP. And I think there's chem and math before econs. But, so as I said, the plan will most likely be Monday, Wednesday, then Monday. Then I'll see you on 16, 17, and then we'll do 3 intensive. So the intensive, the dates will be 19th, 20th, 21st. I will text you all the time. Okay? Okay, that'll be all. I'll see you on Monday if you come. If not, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And if you have questions, please stay. If not, you can go.